This is Unrendered on IKTV. You can follow us on Twitter at iConcepts. I'm chatting with Mrs. Anesia Baptiste on this edition of Unrendered. Anesia,
Yes.
why and the two parties, why are they not fit to govern? That's how we left the last segment of the program. And you were talking about leadership styles, and the one way you said that you were unfairly treated by Mr. Eustace on an issue that you thought that you stood up on and, exerted your right. You said Gonsalves and his party would do the same thing, testimony in the fact that they brought 16 charges against you for, again, as you put it, standing up for your right and expressing your views on the constitutional reform. So, why do you think, beyond that none of these parties are fit to govern?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not the only one who has been a victim of political victimization under both governments, but I realize they both have a fundamental problem with how they handle being criticized, or persons in the country and in their teams being critical of them. I think on the part of the New Democratic Party, the leadership is really showing a sort of, for lack of a better word, a kind of dead way about them.
When you say dead, I mean,
when I say dead, they do not behave with the kind of vigorous and active and energetic manner in which they need to go forward to take this country.
But they've been very active, Anesia. They've been active. They recently held a protest march.
Protest is one thing. Effectiveness is another thing, Tony.
In what way are they being ineffective or
Well,
not being effective?
Well, clearly, they make a lot of mistakes with regards to how they handle matters that they consider will give them political points, score them political points. I mean, I was in the parliament earlier today, and that was one perfect example. I couldn't understand the need for the unruly behavior of one of the members on the opposition side with respect to his request for a chair. He said his members of his constituency had bought for him. He wanted to bring the chair up, and the speaker asked him to wait until lunchtime, and he made a big bad about it. And from my understanding, I was listening first at home, and then I came down to the parliament. I found it was totally unnecessary and unproductive. We talk about the parliament and how often we feel it is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, but then you go and you behave with this. Another occasion was where one of the young senators came in, and there was a disruption of the ministerial address from one of the ministers on the government side, and there was no reason for it, if you ask me. I mean, I'm talking about governing. If you can't handle your own internal affairs and you have your own members being so disruptive and unruly and you can't even manage them, it ended with the member having to be asked to leave. And when there was some request for the member to be allowed back.
We're talking about Daniel Cummins here, Honorable Daniel Cummins.
Yes, when there was a request for him to return in the afternoon, he had gone on the radio and made disparaging comments about the Speaker and the House and so on. And I mean, then you had another member saying, oh, well, Mr. Speaker, we all transgress sometimes. So what really is your position? Where do you stand? Was he right? Was he wrong?
And I hear you.
And this is people who want to govern.
Right. But I'm going to ask you. I can't resist but asking you, because you once sat with them. What would you have done today, for example, if you were sitting there? If you, I mean, you're out now, so you're expressing your displeasure and your disgust. But suppose you were sitting there as a senator with them, as you were, and that display took place, what would you have done?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that I'm no longer sitting there, because I've seen a sort of deterioration since I have no longer been there with them, and I really I'm thankful I'm no longer there, because it beats me. You know, what really would I have done? I would have probably expressed my disagreement afterwards in a meeting. What could I do in the very moment?
Right, so you,
right, because other members just
there.
sat there too,
yeah.
Right? What could I do in the very moment? But one thing I know, and I took note of it this morning as I looked on, I listened to the Minister of Education talking about the great performance of our students at CXC in the schools. And as she did it, I saw the members on the government side pounding the table in agreement and support, and I didn't see that reaction from the opposition side.
So,
and I remembering that I used to pound too when there was good things, because I think that is how we need to move forward with politics. I did not hear, and I stand corrected, but I did not hear one member of the opposition side give congratulatory remarks to the students and the schools for their performance in CXC. Instead, it was just confusion and unruly behavior. And that is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Because if you can't be fair enough to admit when your opponents, even though they are your opponents, do good and the country is doing well, then what really is your interest in governance? Is it just about pursuing your personal long-time aims of your cliques, you want to get there, or is it about moving the country forward and country development and country maturity and growth? Is it that? And that's a concern I have when I look at the way some people behave.
You saw it fit to join the ranks of the NDP at some stage.
During the time of the referendum.
Right, so you must have done an assessment. Even after the referendum was over, you then became a senator after that,
Yes.
right? You must have done an assessment of the party, what it stood for, the leadership. And we're talking only recently.
Yes.
Have you, or are you saying that there's been a deterioration, a rapid deterioration since that time that you made the assessment that you wanted to be part of them?
Yes, if you recall the last part of my letter when I wrote it, some people made fun of it, but I actually said, and I remember saying something to this effect, basically appealing to the leader of the opposition and saying to him, please don't make me think I have misjudged you and that I've misjudged this party. Because I felt really disappointed. I thought that they believed in the ideals of rights and justice and freedoms and the protections thereof. You know, when I was in the referendum and so on, and I joined on that basis. You have to understand, as a young person in politics and as someone who spent a lot of time outside studying, I really didn't have personal knowledge of many of these men. Okay, but the party presents itself with, it's like if you just come into the country and you see the two parties, you know about their manifesto, you know about the things they say, and you may make a decision based on that. That doesn't mean you're going to know every last character or even agree with every last thing. It's reality. Nobody, in terms of in government, no government is perfect, and you wouldn't get a perfect team, etc., etc. You'd have disagreements, but you would have enough points of agreement where you figure you can work with it. Okay, but when it comes to fundamental ideals, which I saw firstly in my own experience to be seriously transgressed, and then I saw it subsequently in other matters, the matter of the firing of his secretary and how that was handled, etc. So it's not only me I was talking about when I spoke of the way they treat their own. When I saw all those other things, I see a serious deterioration taking
because
place.
I cannot hear a sensible argument up to now that says what was wrong in the way Mr. Eustace fired the secretary. You know, secretaries, people get fired for transgressing, for not performing, for a variety of reasons, and not because this is a political party that there should be an exception. Tell me, why do you think Mr. Eustace did handle that
well, if you notice, I said
improperly?
the manner in which it was dealt with, and that is what I really am speaking about, because I have indicated to more than one person who asked me, I said, well, look, I don't have all the details, and I'm not saying that he doesn't have the prerogative to part ways with his secretary if he feels it's necessary. But for goodness sake, 12 years of service, somebody who has worked for you, somebody who certainly didn't do everything wrong, and when I looked at what is supposed to be the letter that was issued, it left much to be desired in terms of it would appear that there was a lot of hearsay involved in his decision based on the letter. I mean, we're not really dealing with that in details. I can't quote it exactly. But when I read it, I questioned seriously what's really going on here. How does you're talking about somebody, and this is something you have to point out, Tony. Yes, every day people could get fired, etc. But this is the opposition leader. He is pitching for the job of prime minister. So he's being looked at the person who's about to manage the country. So it's obvious that persons would look at those things to determine how really is he going to handle his internal affairs.
But he also has to make tough decisions.
True.
And he also has to come down.
Tough decision is not just
where he
being
thinks
able to
right is right, wrong is wrong, and he has to deal with people who have transgressed in his mind.
Yeah, but he should know. It's not just about in your mind. You should know. And when you're being tested on the facts, you should be able to answer the test and not just do it because you feel you have the power to do it. Because even if you have the power to do it, you will be judged on what you do, right? So yes, tough decision is one thing, but is it the right decision?
I'm going to ask you a direct and blunt question. In as much as we are looking at Anesia, Ralph Gonsalves, and you are vying for the same job that Eustace is vying for, and the one that Gonsalves wants to keep. Gonsalves often pitches himself as a man of the poor, a man of the people. Rutical is one of his words. Contrast that with the image that is perpetuated of the leader of the opposition, kind and gentle. In fact, he's the one who more or less brought that phrase into play and wanted to be identified by that. So my question is, do you think Eustace is a kinder, gentler man than Gonsalves, or a kinder, gentler man, period? And do you think that Gonsalves is a man of the poor more so than Eustace?
Well, let me just put it this way. First of all, I'd prefer really not to answer a question like that in terms of looking at character traits of individuals. I'd rather talk about the policies and the behavior of the party generally.
Let's see how they manifest in policies.
In terms of the issue of the Unity Labour Party's profession of its interest in the poor, etc., you have a party which, while it speaks of its concerns for the poor, it has in fact, in its tenure, neglected a lot of persons who are in need. And it comes back to the same point I was making about the issue of basically supporting your own. Okay?
So you're saying
that
they are particularly guilty of disregarding others in need.
Yes, because of their political persuasions and their criticisms of them.
Labor.
Yes, pretty much. And also I want to talk about the fact that I think some of the policies, it may not be official policy, but in practice shows a lot of wastage. Because in that same issue of political victimization, you get a lot of scenarios where persons who don't have needs in certain areas end up with certain state resources which can go to people who have need, and I think that's wastage. Okay, I also think there is corruption, and I don't like the way it is handled, where you have faults with certain persons in different areas, and instead of really being accountable to the people and dealing with it, you just sort of shuffle them around. I think that defeats the purpose and not creating enough jobs for the people. And also lately it seems that there's some effort to perhaps perpetuate a dynasty in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
We're at the end of the second segment. I want to continue this. I want to pick it up on this idea of perpetuating a dynasty as well. But I also want us to go to the policies of the NDP which come under the umbrella of kinder and gentler. Okay, so when we come back to the third segment. This is Unrendered on IKTV. I'm Tony Regisford, and I'm chatting with Mrs. Anesia Baptiste. She is the leader of the Democratic Republican Party. More when we come back.